Night. Sun is set this evening. The light dim. Over the canopy of the trees, under which and beneath the ground Edwin had slept through the day. He makes his way to crawl out of the very tight hole in the ground that he dug himself the previous night. Moving the stump he had pulled over the hole, sliding it to one side. He begins to crawl out, keeping his hand to the bag slung across his shoulders in an effort to keep from smashing it or mushing it against a surface. He makes his way out. His glasses carefully stowed, his eyes exposed in the red glow. He takes a deep, forced, but as natural feeling of breath of the night air as is possible. He moves the stump back over the hole to conceal it. And shifts some of the leaves, dirt, rocks around his foot to make it look as though it wasn't actually disturbed. He takes a look around at his surroundings, trying to get his bearings. Careful look. He starts walking in a similar direction as he took to get to this area before. Thinking to himself, if only he could find the moon. I will have him make wits and survival. He begins walking for some time, shifting his stride a little bit to his right. He thinks he's going north. So by reason, he should be heading a little northeasterly. He begins to at least gain a little comfort, or he at least begins to gain a little bit of comfort, and that he knows where he is. And if his guess is correct, he's found his way to the national park, just outside the city. Walking through the woods, he finds his way to a trail and a sign along it. It's not often used by visitors. The sign indicates that it's a back trail, most likely used by park rangers. Walking just trail, closer to the edge, more within the forest. He reaches into his bag and pulls out his glasses to place them on his face. As he does so, he squints ever so slightly and then opens his eyes even wider to try to focus them. Concentrate. Focus on seeing more clearly. When he lifts his head, aside from the usual glare in his eyes, reflecting back, the world becomes clearer. His vision less hindered by the night, by the dark. The glare reflecting back in the glass, still a little hindering. He continues to make his way through. He walks through for some time. An hour, he guesses. He's not sure. He doesn't check the time. Shifting his stride again, he heads away from the trail, walking straight and right, more at an angle than anything. As he rounds a tree, large, majestic, rather calm, like the rest around him in the thick wood, he stops. He clears his throat a little bit. He thinks. After a few moments, he lets out a sound. He tries to make it sound less put on, a little more natural. The sound of a corvid crow, or a corvid's crow. Caw, a caw. Clearing his throat again. He deepens his voice a little bit and dries again. Recalling a lesson his sire had taught him at one point. At this point, I will make charisma and survival. beckoning. Okay. He waits for long moments. Waits, tries to repeat the call. Standing still amongst the wood. Eventually taking his phone out of his bag, turning it on, checks the time. He's been walking for a couple hours now. Puts it to sleep and places it securely back into the bag. Retightening the strap around his shoulder or over his shoulders. Continues walking very casually. Not moving too slow. A decent moving pace. A pace that'll take him some distance without being leisurely. As he walks for a while longer, he clears his throat again and decides to give it another try. After all, he thinks, why should a failure indicate or mean you give up? After a few attempts, repetitively calling, he continues walking, waiting to see if anything answers his call. As he continues through the woods, picks up his pace a little bit more to just under a power walk. When he feels a sharp or when he feels a set of sharp things on his shoulder after a flutter of wind on his left side. He stops, startled ever so slightly, and looks. It had been quite some time. He holds his hand out toward the bird. Makes a couple calls to it. Tells it. Thinks while looking at it. It's okay. It won't hurt you. I need help. Bird, after a while, after looking at his hand a little bit, pecking at a finger, hops onto his hand. Edwin pulls it in front of him, lifting another hand very, very carefully. Not immediately touching the bird, easing his hand toward it. It's okay. He strokes the feathers from its head down its back. He sits or stands watching the bird, listening to the sounds it makes, trying to imitate them. In a series of beaky chitters, very light and soft crows, he asks in a he says in a very odd fashion to most onlookers, "Help. Find bright lights. Loud sounds. Help find." Bird looks at him, cocks his head. Edwin cocks his head in the opposite direction. The bird flies off. He looks up with his unhindered vision, slightly unhindered, and he begins to follow, moving his pace to a jog, occasionally breathing in through his nose and out through his mouth, an old habit. He tries to keep his eye on the bird and also in front of him. With the exception of a couple stumbling a couple times, he manages to stay on his feet and not tumble into the dirt hard, risking what little he carries on him to breaking. The bird, the raven, looks back a couple times, circles before it continues on its straight flight path and chosen in the direction it chose, as if waiting for him to keep up. He takes note of this. Interesting. More time passes as time does. And in his jog, eventually begins to see very, very bright lights and distant sounds, motorized sounds off in the distance toward the lights. Over the next hill and rise, he finds himself looking over the landscape and down over a portion of the city, New Sarum. The raven comes back, circles a couple times, lands on Edwin's shoulder. Edwin beckons the bird back onto his hand. And in the same beaky chitters and soft crowing sounds, he attempts to thank the animal. Go. And he gives the bird a little bit of a boost into the air. Thank you. He stands on top of the hilly rise as he overlooks looks over the city. Below him, the bright lights of New Sarum, at least one section of it. He sees rows and rows of houses, some seeming to snake across the landscape, others in odd, bizarre man-made patterns. As he starts toward the metropolitan sprawl, he heads toward an area that has a little bit lower wall dividing parts of the city from the rural and wooded areas just outside civilization. Takes him a couple attempts, but eventually he gets over one of the shorter areas of wall. He pulls the hood of his hooded sweatshirt over his head, places his hands within the front pocket, and begins walking through the very nice, very quaint, very serene upper class neighborhoods of the city, making his way towards the more downtown area above the historic districts, and toward the very same coffee shop, Desperate Dan's, so that he may charge his phone, check some emails securely, and continue the work required to try to recover some of what was lost. Walk is more or less uneventful. Couple times police cars seem to slow down and look at him. He looks towards the car, smiles and waves, and nods. Police cars, or the officers inside, look at him, wave, and continue on their way. Another hour and a half or so, he eventually makes it to Desperate Dan's. He heads inside, checks a little bit of money in his wallet, orders a coffee, and sits down to do the work that he feels he must. Looks, checks, the web for his next squatting location, or place best for him to sleep throughout the very next day, so that he can wake safely to the night once more. Takes a sip of his coffee, as the scene comes to a close.